U.S. forces boarded and seized a Shadowfleet tanker in the North Atlantic, while a Russian Kilo-class submarine sat 5 miles behind it and did nothing. So how did it get to this? And why didn't the escort step in? Because in 2026, escort sometimes means emotional support submarine. Late December, Caribbean Basin. While most of the world was distracted by the holidays, the U.S. Coast Guard cutter Munro, WMSL 755, was tracking a 160,000 deadweight-ton tanker broadcasting as the Bella 1. The Coast Guard attempted a routine boarding, and the Munro issued the standard bridge-to-bridge challenge on VHF Channel 16. Merchant Vessel Bella 1, this is United States Coast Guard. State your cargo, destination, and last port of call. Translation? Tell us the truth, or at least pick a lie and commit to it. The response was absolute silence. The Bella 1 ignored sirens, lights, and repeated hails, then did something that instantly turned routine into a chase. Its bridge crew slammed the diesel engines to the red line and executed a hard turn toward the open Atlantic. In the Caribbean, U.S. law enforcement detachments, leadettes, usually have near-total domain awareness. By running for the high seas, the Bella 1 was betting the U.S. wouldn't have the legal or political stomach for a mid-ocean pursuit. It miscalculated, spectacularly. What followed was a 2,500-mile slow-motion chase that lasted more than 14 days. The tanker pushed north-northeast toward the Iceland corridor at roughly 12.5 knots. And this wasn't just running, it was tactical. The Bella 1 used heavy weather routing, steering straight into North Atlantic winter storms to make a small boat boarding attempt effectively impossible. Tracking analysts also noticed the ship riding the edges of multiple exclusive economic zones, playing a boundary game. Stay in international waters and risk the right of visit, slip into territorial seas and force the U.S. to pause or escalate politically. Then came the moment the tracking data went dark. Mid-Atlantic, the ship's AIS signature began to glitch. The classic Shadowfleet identity scramble designed to wipe a vessel's history in real time. The name Bella 1 vanished from the transponder. In its place appeared Marinera, and it wasn't subtle. P-8 Poseidon surveillance aircraft caught the crew in the act with long-range cameras. They weren't just sailing, they were painting. In freezing rain, sailors rolled on a fresh Russian flag with mops and rollers, as if a coat of paint could rewrite ownership, registration, and sanctions exposure. Washington labeled it a Shadowfleet sanction evasion hull, helping Moscow bypass the $60 price cap. Russia fired back with a formal diplomatic note calling the pursuit an outright piratical act, insisting that as of December 31st, the ship had been granted temporary registration in the Russian Federation. Which is rich, because a fleet that survives by swapping names, flags, and paperwork doesn't get to cry piracy when someone finally asks the next question. By January 7th, the U.S. 6th Fleet decided they had seen enough. Working with the British, they cornered the Marinera at 63 degrees north, 17 degrees west, just outside Icelandic territorial waters. The UK confirms pre-planned operational support. RAF P-8 Poseidon's overhead and a Royal Navy frigate holding the perimeter. And now the chessboard gets lethal. And unlike propaganda, chess has rules. OSINT watchers and reporting confirm Russian naval assets in the area, including a Project 636.3 Kilo-class submarine and a surface combatant shadowing the NATO perimeter. So yes, Russia showed up. They just showed up as an audience. 5 miles astern, the Kilo is listening, tubes flooded, recording the sound profile of every rotor blade. 03:15 local time, North Atlantic. The sea is violent. Sea state 6, deck pitching 20 degrees, freezing fog, 45-knot gusts, 30-foot swells. In other words, a perfect day for a routine operation, if you're American and slightly unwell. 2 MH-60R Seahawks from the USS Gerald R. Ford hover just 40 feet above the aft deck, rotor wash turning salt spray into a blinding whiteout. At the same time, MH-6 Little Birds from the 160th SOAR buzz the bridge windows, thermal optics pinning every heat signature inside. Fast ropes drop. Negotiations concluded. Before the bridge crew can even reach a panic button, the takeover is surgical. Within 90 seconds, the engine room is suppressed, the bridge is secured, and the ship, Bella 1 turned Marinera, hand-painted flag and all, is under new management. And the Russian escort? Close enough to witness, disciplined enough not to blink first. Why? 3 reasons. First, there is the simple risk math where losing one sanctioned tanker just isn't worth starting a shooting war with a NATO carrier strike group. Then there is the legal mess surrounding the ship's identity. Because the ship's registration was in dispute, it was technically a stateless vessel under international law. which made a Russian counterattack legally impossible to defend on the world stage. Finally, there was a massive gap in local muscle. Far from the Northern Fleet's home ports, the Russians knew the local picture wasn't theirs. In that box, P-8s above, NATO ships around, you don't escalate. You get targeted before you finish your sentence. This wasn't an isolated win for the US. It was a demonstration. While the Marinera was being towed toward the US East Coast, a second hammer fell, because the point wasn't just to take one ship. The point was to prove the ocean isn't dark anymore. Back in the Caribbean, the tanker MT Sophia was interdicted by the USS Winston S. Churchill. The Sophia was another ghost hull, running with its AIS off for 6 months. U.S. Southern Command didn't mince words. They labeled it a stateless, sanctioned dark fleet motor tanker. That's the message in plain English. If you run, you will be chased. If you hide, you will be found. And if you try to repaint your identity mid-ocean, someone will still show up on your deck. Operation Southern Spear wasn't a one-off boarding. It was a coordinated sweep. So Moscow did what it does best in public, stayed quiet, and called it restraint. Not because they accepted it, because they were choosing the time and place to respond. Restraint isn't surrender. Sometimes it's just scheduling. By January 9th, Moscow signaled the deniable shipping strategy was cracking. Shell companies weren't enough. Fake flags weren't enough. If paperwork couldn't protect the oil, then Russia would try the old method, escort it with the Navy. OSINT trackers and satellite imagery picked up a new formation south of Portugal, and this wasn't stealth. This was a visible statement. Leading the formation, RFS Severomorsk, a 7,000-ton Udalay-class destroyer built for one job, submarine hunting. A first-line combatant, bristling with SSN-14 missiles and backed by 100mm deck guns. A ship designed to make people think twice before they check a manifest. Behind it, the convoy, Sparta 4, Miss Zhelaniya. Officially, the destination was Port Said, Egypt. But the OSINT community knows the pattern, the TARDIS pattern. Sparta 4 isn't just a cargo ship. It's owned by Oberon Logistica, a subsidiary tied to the Russian Ministry of Defense, with a track record linked to deliveries of military cargo, everything from heavy equipment to systems components, toward Russia's logistics artery into the eastern Mediterranean. Miss Zhelaniya carries its own shadow, tied to Russian-linked infrastructure activity in Libya, and frequently going dark near Tobruk, exactly where you'd go if you wanted to move quietly, transfer cargo, or avoid questions. By putting these holes behind the Severomorsk, Russia drew a new line in the water. Not a legal line, a try-me line. They're betting on this. The U.S. will seize a stateless tanker, but it won't risk a kinetic exchange with a Russian destroyer just to look inside a cargo hold. To understand why Russia would even risk a frontline warship to protect just a few cargo hulls, you have to look at the math. The Shadowfleet is now estimated at 1,500 to 1,600 vessels, many of them aging rust buckets that should have been scrapped years ago. They operate outside the normal system, no Western insurance, no transparency, and a toolbox of deception that's basically standard operating procedure. AIS spoofing, electronic masks that claim a ship is in the South Atlantic while it's actually loading crude in a Russian Arctic port. Dark ship-to-ship transfers, meeting at night mid-ocean to pump oil from a sanctioned tanker into a clean one, laundering the origin. The flag hop, changing registrations again and again, sometimes multiple times in a year, staying one step ahead of paperwork and enforcement. And the stakes aren't minor. Reuters has cited estimates that these networks touch a significant share of global oil movements, an industrial-scale valve feeding Moscow's war economy. That's why this matters. If the U.S. can seize these hulls at will, it doesn't just embarrass Russia, it threatens the fuel line. This is the most dangerous kind of friction, not declared war. White-hot gray zone. The margin for error is non-existent. One aggressive maneuver by a U.S. Seahawk near a Russian destroyer. One warning shot from a Russian deck gun that clips a hull instead of splashing water. One sonar contact misread as an incoming torpedo in a North Atlantic storm. And here's the key lesson from January 7th. The reason the Kilo didn't act. In modern naval warfare, being found is being dead. The moment that submarine opened outer tube doors, the acoustic change would have been picked up by the circling P-8s, the same aircraft that had been stacking active and passive sonobuoys for a full day. U.S. and British escorts would have had a fire solution before the Russian commander could even finish building certainty. But with the Severomorsk moving south, the game changes. A surface destroyer is harder to suppress silently. It's visible, it's political, it's a moving line in the water. The shadows are over. Now comes the escort.